The last time we saw this beast of the Mesozoic Tyrannosaurus Rex, I asked you guys how I should paint it. And I thought for sure you were going to say the Lost World Buck, but overwhelmingly, you said Prehistoric Planet. Fortunately, this Rex was never painted, so we get guilt-free painting this time around. I disassembled and base coated this T-Rex prior to recording, but I still ended up with 5.5 hours of raw footage, so don't worry, there's still plenty to see. If you like this Rex and you want to add it to your collection, it's going to be available on eBay after this video. Before I start painting, we'll take inventory. The first part is the head, followed by the jaw, the rear portion of the torso and front part of the torso, the tail in 3 pieces, all the feet, the standing legs, the neck, and the articulated legs, as well as its 2 itty-bitty arms, and the tongue. And the first thing we're going to do is hit each of these pieces with a burnt umber wash, which I will speed up for you because we have 5.5 hours of repaint to get through. The wash is just watered down acrylic paint, but by completely covering each and one of these pieces in it, it's going to show us all of the recessed details that were sculpted into this thing. And there is a lot of recessed detail to show off. We are just about done with the wash. The opposite of a wash, of course, is a dry brush, which highlights all of the raised details. And since that wash covered up a lot of the warm buff that we base coated this dinosaur in, then go through and dry brush a lot of that warm buff back on and bring some of that color back out, and make the model look a little less dirty. Since this isn't exactly an instant process, and I don't want to take your whole day, I'm going to use the magic of video editing and I'll just show you guys the highlights and try to speed this up a little bit. The torso, of course, takes the most time. There's a lot of surface area to cover. Once that's done, we can get on to the leg. The drumsticks weren't too bad, which is good because he's got 2 sets of legs. Then we can move on to the tail, and finally finish up with the tip of the tail. Oh yeah, it has arms too. Now that we've finished up with that initial dry brushing, I'm going to go in with my airbrush, and using toasted marshmallow, we're going to put counter shading on all of the ventral areas of this model. Even though I'm using an airbrush at this point, I'm still trying to be careful and only use thin coats because we don't want to cover up all of that wash that we already put on. With the body done, we're going to go ahead and hit all 3 sections of the tail, and get the backs of the legs. And now we're ready for the next step. The mouth is usually one of the last things I do, but since we've got to put this head back together, we're going to do that now. We're using my favorite mouth color, a combination of classic caramel with a little bit of metallic red. And we're going to make sure we get the entire interior of the mouth with this. And the tongue, which is a separate piece. Had I not disassembled this prior to painting, this would have been a real pain in the butt. As is, it's already a challenge to paint the tongue and not my fingers. Another vital part of the inside of the mouth is the teeth. Using a combination of antique parchment and yellow ochre, I'm going to go in and hit each one of these murder bananas, being careful to get the entire tooth and none of the gums. A process made hundreds of times easier by having it disassembled. Now I'm going to do something slightly different and coat each one of these teeth with super glue. And that's going to help to protect the paint on the teeth from this next part. Once each of the teeth has been coated with super glue, I'm going to hit the entire mouth with a dirty wash. This wash is a combination of chestnut with just a tad of metallic red. I've never thought that the inside of a Tyrannosaurus's mouth would be one of the most sanitary environments. This wash, in addition to bringing out the recessed detail, is also going to help it look like this Tyrannosaurus Rex eats tons of meat and doesn't brush his teeth. But even though the Tyrannosaurus doesn't brush his teeth, we're going to actually wipe some of this wash off of his teeth with a Q-tip. And that super glue we coated them with earlier is going to ensure that we don't wipe off that tooth-colored paint as well. Now our teeth can be dirty, but not straight up brown. My next not-so-secret weapon for inside of the mouth coloration is a very thin metallic purple wash. And that's actually going to give this whole inside of the mouth almost like a silver skin kind of effect, and make it look very raw meaty. Just remember, this is a very thin wash. We don't want it to look purple. Alright, I think the inside of the mouth was a success. Now that that's done, we can start in on those face patterns. The Prehistoric Planet Tyrannosaurus Rex has some very distinctive striping on his face. The base color of the T-Rex in Prehistoric Planet is a very light, kind of almost off-white color, very similar to warm buff, and as luck would have it, that's what I've already base coated this thing in. So we just need to add the stripes, and we're going to use some watered down burnt umber for that. By watering it down, we can manipulate the consistency and help it flow over the model better, and then we can get some nice little sharp lines. To apply those stripes, I'm using my favorite painting tool, the toothpick. Using a reference picture that I printed out of the T-Rex, I'm just trying to copy those stripes as accurately as I can. It looks like the Prehistoric Planet T-Rex also has a lighter stripe that runs from just above and behind the eye horizontally down the length of the Tyrannosaur. I'm going to go ahead and paint that in white. It won't stay white ultimately because there's going to be many layers of paint over it, but we'll just mark it out with white for now. Now we'll go back to those face stripes. To make these stripes look more natural, I'm going to be using a lot of different shades of brown. Alright, now we're going to work on the patterns on the T-Rex proper. And this T-Rex has rows of spots and rosettes that descend from the head and go all the way down the body, starting small and getting much larger towards the middle of the torso. We'll take care of the spots and rosettes on the neck first. And we'll be sure to add plenty of speckles with a toothpick. Ultimately, these will be under a lot of layers of paint, so I'm using pretty dark colors for them. I'm putting some short black stripes on the top of the neck. But as the stripes descend down the neck and onto the body, I'm going to have them kind of fade into being rosettes, and this will help to tie them into the patterns on the rest of the body. At least that's my plan. Okay, now for the main torso rosettes. They're essentially large hollow spots, and on the Prehistoric Rex, they're very squarish. In fact, they almost look like horseshoes. Moving on to the thigh, I'm going to add a lot of tiled splotches. These splotches will come together as stripes towards the back of the thigh, but towards the front of the thigh, the splotches are going to be much larger and closer together, and ultimately, these will be under several layers of paint too. I've found that by doing a series of splotches and speckles underneath the layers of paint that come later, it gives the entire coloration a much more natural appearance, especially those areas which appear to be a solid color. Going in with a toothpick now, I'm going to add some more speckles. You can never have too many speckles on a dinosaur, and right now I'm adding a crap ton of them and some more splotches around the shoulder. Similarly to how I had the stripes on the back of the neck fade into rosettes on the body, I'm doing the inverse for the tail, making those rosettes become stripes on the tail. Once the tail is done, I'm going to move on to the dinky little arms. I'm going to be painting the arms in kind of a tiled pattern, and when I'm done with it, it should look very much like a salamander. But don't worry, these too will be under many other layers of paint later. The thing about Tyrannosaurus arms is those are just the forelimbs. It also has hind limbs, and we're going to be doing a similar pattern on those as well. The bulk of the patterning and splotching will be done on the front of the limb. As we get towards the rear, I'll make those patterns smaller, and ultimately fade into nothingness. So that the initial patterning is more or less done, I'm going to go over those patterns with my airbrush, and that's going to soften the edges on them and make them look a lot more natural. Once that's done, I'm going to move on to the arms, and I'll cover those patterns in their first layer of dark brown paint. And that'll obscure, but not completely hide, all of the splotches we've already painted on them. Alright, let's go back to that main T-Rex body now, and we'll start airbrushing over all of the dorsal patterns. And we would be remiss if we did not also include the tail. Because Tyrannosaurus Rex is a large animal, it has a long tail, so bear with me as I get through this exhilarating process. Can't forget to do the other side too. Now that we've got this tail more or less taken care of, we're going to do the same thing to the dinosaur's thighs. And all of those splotches and speckles are going to start to come together and be a cohesive pattern. Darker in the front, lighter in the rear. And we're going to do the same thing to those lower legs. But because you haven't got all day, unless you do, maybe your schedule's pretty open. But for those of you who don't have all day, I'm just going to show this on the standing legs, and we'll skip the articulated legs for now. Now I'm just going to go back to some of the patterns on the main body and work on the thigh a little bit more too. We should hopefully have a seamless transition between the lower legs and the thigh once they're connected, and that means making the front of that thigh a little bit darker. Now I'm going to go ahead and spray the main torso with a thin coat of light brown. and we'll start building up those layers that'll eventually give our T-Rex its signature brown coloration. And what do you know? That white stripe I painted along the body is starting to look not very white. Now, everything that we do to the torso, we must also do to the tail. It would look wonky indeed if the tail had only half as many layers of brown as the torso does. And because I want the arm to actually look like it belongs on the torso, we're going to go ahead and spray some brown on that shoulder too. And then do the same thing to the drumsticks again. Painting a dinosaur in pieces is a little bit more tricky than painting a dinosaur that's completely assembled. But I'll do my best, so bear with me here. I want the patterns on this T-Rex to be a little bit more subtle than they look right now, so we're going to spray some more layers of brown over them. We don't want them completely obscured, but we do want them to be a lot less flashy. And we're going to go in and do the same thing for the patterns on the tail. I think it's time we assembled this Rex. That's better. Now that the pieces of this Tyrannosaurus are a whole dinosaur, I'm going to go over it a few more times with some browns in the airbrush and try to build it up. I want the rosettes obscured, but not completely gone. And this is accomplished with gradual light layers. I'm going to add some darker brown now, and go through and reinforce some of the patterns on the Tyrannosaurus's head and face. And maybe go over some of the patterns on the T-Rex's back as well, because why not? Now I'm going to go back to a light brown and use it to tie in those stripes on the face, but only lightly. By giving the whole Tyrannosaurus a dusting with the light brown, we can obscure the rosettes a little bit more, and give the whole thing a little bit lighter color and tone down those dark browns. Now to make the feet look more dramatic, I'm going to go through and give them a black wash, and I'll drag this black wash up from the feet into the lower leg, and then kind of fade it into the rest of the colors. I think it'll look really nice after we put a dry brush on top of this wash. Turns out, there's more than one leg. I should probably do the other one too. I also did the articulated legs, but I did those off camera, because you don't have all day. Unless you do. We're going to add the smallest amount of red to some warm buff, and we're just going to warm up the throat. He doesn't need a bright red throat, but it should be a little bit warmer than the rest of the ventral area, you know, to help him attract mates and stuff. Tyrannosaurus. Right now I'm just using some more warm buff on a toothpick to blend in the ventral area to the browns. Now we're going to do some dry brushing in territorial beige to bring out some of those raised details, and there's a lot of raised details, almost as many as recessed details. Also put some nice dry brushing over that wash we did on those feet earlier, and that's really going to bring out those scoots. I mean, why would you even have scoots if you don't want to show them off? And because we want him to be a healthy Tyrannosaurus, I'm just going to dry brush a little bit of color around his eye socket. We'll just help to highlight those big beautiful eyes right now. And then we'll add some dry brushing in all the keratinous areas on the T-Rex's head. And because it's a T-Rex, there's a lot of keratin on his head. One of the disadvantages of Tyrannosaurus Rex-sized arms is the inability to wipe one's nose. So we're going to paint some boogers and snot inside of his nostrils. And maybe we'll have it run down the tip of his snout. I mean, give the poor guy a break. Kleenex won't even be invented for another 65 million years. Now we paint les claws. And because this figure came with several pairs of extra feet, I don't think we're going to show you all of them, but there's a lot of claws. And we're going to paint them all a pretty gloss black. And by watering down the paint just a little bit, it'll flow nicely over the claws, without splashing onto the scoots. If I'm painting the claws, that means we must be getting pretty close to done, which means the next step is the eyeballs. And we're going to paint those a pretty king's gold. And no eyeball would be complete if it didn't also have pupils. We're using gloss black for that. I may have also added a few veins with metallic red. That Tyrannosaurus was so much fun, I completely forgot that this came with a display base. We better paint that too. I'm going to start by painting all of the grassy areas with territorial beige. It's going to be dry grass. Then I'll add a black wash to all of the rocky areas, some of which I also painted territorial beige. Whoops. With that done, I'm going to start dry brushing all of those rocky areas. I'm going to start with my darkest gray, pavement, and then progressively use lighter and lighter grays as I go along. Hopefully, the end result of that is that the rocky areas will look rocky. And since those rocky areas got a wash, I figured the grassy areas might be a little bit jealous, so I decided to give them a wash in burnt umber. It's gonna be dry grass. But enough about that, let's do some more dry brushing on those rocks. Yay, dry brush.
Dry brush, dry brush, dry brush!
It's possible I may be getting a little bit carried away with the dry brush on this base. I'll let you guys decide when it's done. For the grassy areas, I'm using a very yellow-green. Again, I'm looking for dry grass. Lawn care wouldn't be invented for another 65 million years or so. And even then, Tyrannosaurus rex doesn't really strike me as the kind of guy that regularly waters his lawn. The final dry brush on the rocks is going to be country gray, which is very light gray. And then there's just a couple of twigs in the grassy area, so we'll go ahead and do those with a brown. Once that's done, this base should be done. And once the base is done, it'll be time for Tyrannosaurus rex glamour shots.
Hey, hello. My name is Tyrannosaurus Rex, and this video is over. What are you doing still watching? Go outside and get some sun, unless it is raining. Then just watch some more YouTube. There are many more videos for you to check out on this channel.